1,000? That's insulting. Officer Frank Dobson's meaty hand shot out and grabbed the man's wrist, twisting it slightly. You think your son's DUI and the coke in his glove compartment is worth just $1,000? The businessman winced, glancing nervously around the shadowy corner of Jefferson Park. Dusk was settling over the city, painting long shadows between the trees where they stood. Fine, 2,000, the man whispered, his expensive suit catching the last rays of sunlight. He pulled out another envelope. Frank released his grip, his jowls quivering with satisfaction as he pocketed both envelopes. Smart decision, Mr. Harmon. Like I always say, what stays in the park? The blinding lights hit him from 3 directions simultaneously. Police, don't move. Hands where we can see them. The businessman Harmon dropped to his knees immediately, hands raised. But Officer Frank Dobson, 23 years on the force, recipient of the Mayor's Medal of Valor in 2013, father of 1, divorced, mortgage underwater, and 50 pounds overweight, made the stupidest decision of his miserable life. He ran. His heavy boots pounded across the manicured grass, his gut bouncing painfully against his duty belt. The envelopes crackled against his chest inside his uniform pocket. Behind him, officers shouted, their voices carrying a note of disbelief that one of their own would actually flee. Frank cut between 2 oak trees, wheezing already, his 50-year-old knees screaming in protest. He could hear footsteps gaining on him, younger, faster officers who hadn't spent decades sitting in patrol cars, drinking gas station coffee. Stop! Police! Detective Rivera's voice, the kid he'd helped train 10 years ago. Frank's foot caught on something, a root, a rock, his own incompetence, and he went down hard, all 247 pounds of him crashing to the earth. The impact knocked the wind from his lungs. He tried to push himself up, but a knee drove into his back, pinning him to the ground. You stupid bastard, Rivera hissed in his ear, as cold metal handcuffs bit into Frank's wrists. You couldn't even take a bribe with dignity. As they dragged him to his feet, Frank caught sight of Harmon being led away by other officers. The businessman wasn't handcuffed. His eyes met Frank's, and a slight smile crossed his face. That's when Frank Dobson realized he'd been set up. 8 months earlier. Dobson, my office now. Captain Mercer's voice sliced through the morning chatter of the precinct like a blade. Frank looked up from his computer, where he'd been half-heartedly typing up last night's incident reports. The other officers studiously avoided eye contact, suddenly fascinated by their own paperwork. Frank heaved himself to his feet, feeling his lower back protest. At 50, everything hurt. His knees, his back, his pride. He'd been on 3rd shift patrol for 3 years now, the department's way of sidelining older officers until retirement. The midnight to 8 a.m. slot nobody wanted, policing the empty streets of a sleeping city. He lumbered across the bullpen, the younger officers parting before him. Some were hiding smirks. They all knew what was coming. Captain Mercer stood behind his desk, a slim manila folder in his hand. At 62, he still had the hard, lean build of a man who ran 5 miles before breakfast every morning. His silver hair was cropped in the same military cut he'd worn for 30 years. Close the door, Mercer said, not looking up. Frank obeyed, then stood awkwardly in the center of the office, his hat clutched in his hands like a supplicant before a king. Your arrest numbers, Mercer said, finally meeting Frank's gaze. They're abysmal. 3rd quarter in a row. Been working the quiet shifts, Cap. Not much happening at 3 a.m. on Tuesdays. Michaels works the same shift. His numbers are double yours. Frank suppressed a snort. Michaels was 28, with something to prove and a cocaine habit he thought nobody knew about. He spent his shifts harassing homeless people and turning minor infractions into arrest opportunities. The commissioner is on my ass about efficiency, Mercer continued. Budget cuts coming down. You understand what I'm saying here? Frank understood perfectly. At 50, with 23 years on the force, his salary was nearly double what they paid rookies. In the department's eyes, he was expensive deadwood. 5 years till your pension maxes out, Mercer said, his voice dropping slightly. Be ashamed not to make it. The threat hung in the air between them. Pick up your numbers, Frank. I can't protect you otherwise. Frank nodded stiffly, his face burning with humiliation. That all, Captain? One more thing. You're getting a new partner. Mercer shuffled through some papers. Officer Rodriguez, just transferred from the 5 precinct. I work alone. Not anymore. As Frank turned to leave, Mercer added, And Frank? Get your uniform tailored. You're busting out of it. This department has standards. Frank walked out with as much dignity as he could muster, feeling the eyes of the entire bullpen on him. He'd once commanded respect in these halls. Now he was just a joke, a cautionary tale of what happened when you stayed too long. His new partner was waiting by his desk, a kid who looked barely old enough to drink, with a crisp uniform and eager eyes. He stood as Frank approached, hand extended. Officer Miguel Rodriguez, sir. Excited to be working with you. Frank ignored the hand. Nothing exciting about third shift. And don't call me sir. Rodriguez's smile faltered, but didn't disappear. I requested this assignment specifically. Your record from the early 2000s, the Southside gang takedown, the Henderson kidnapping case, that's legendary stuff. Ancient history, Frank muttered, gathering his gear. Get your stuff. Shift briefing in 10. As they walked toward the briefing room, Frank caught sight of his reflection in the glass partition. Rodriguez was right, had been something once. Now his uniform strained across his belly. His face was flushed and jowly, and his eyes carried the dull, defeated look of a man waiting for time to pass. That night, as they patrolled the silent streets of Jefferson City, Rodriguez tried repeatedly to engage Frank in conversation. Where was he from? East Side, born and raised. Was he married? Divorced. 10 years now. Any kids? A daughter, college student. They didn't talk much. What was his most exciting case? Frank ignored that one entirely. Look, kid, Frank finally said as they pulled into a convenience store for coffee at 3 a.m. I'm not here to be your mentor. I'm not here to tell war stories. I'm here to collect a paycheck until I can collect my pension. Keep the questions to yourself. Rodriguez nodded, but Frank could see the disappointment in his eyes. Good, he thought. Learn early that this job crushes everything decent eventually. Inside the store, as Frank paid for his coffee, his credit card was declined. The cashier, a tired woman with comprehending eyes, discreetly slid it back to him. Machine's acting up, she lied kindly. On the house tonight, officer. Frank's face burned with shame as he walked back to the cruiser. It wasn't just the department that saw him as a failure. The banks did too. 3 months behind on his mortgage. Credit cards maxed out. His ex-wife's alimony finally ended last year, but his daughter's college tuition had picked up where that left off. His phone pinged with a text as he started the engine. Dad, I need the tuition money by Friday or they'll drop my classes. Please. Frank put the phone away without answering. There was no money to send. Everything okay? Rodriguez asked. Mind your business, Frank snapped, pulling out of the parking lot with unnecessary force. They drove in silence for an hour, cruising the empty suburban streets of Jefferson City's affluent north side. Nothing ever happened here, which was exactly how the wealthy residents liked it. The radio crackled to life. Any units in the vicinity of 1242 Lakeview Drive? We've got a noise complaint. Frank picked up the radio. Unit 17 responding. Rodriguez looked at him questioningly. That's 3 districts over from our patrol zone. It's Lakeview Drive, Frank replied, flipping on the cruiser's lights. Fastest response gets the gratitude of a city councilman or a bank president. Rodriguez frowned but said nothing as Frank sped through the deserted streets. 1242 Lakeview Drive was a sprawling colonial-style mansion set back from the road, with manicured gardens and a circular driveway where several expensive cars were parked haphazardly. Music pulsed from inside, and silhouettes moved behind the curtained windows. Rich kids' party, Frank said, killing the lights. Parents probably out of town. As they approached the door, a young man stumbled out, clearly intoxicated. He froze when he saw the officers, then quickly tried to straighten himself up. Evening, officers, he slurred. Is there a problem? Noise complaint, Frank said, taking in the kid's custom suit and the Rolex on his wrist. Who owns this house? My father. Richard Harmon. He's in Tokyo on business. Frank recognized the name immediately. Richard Harmon owned half the commercial real estate in Jefferson City and had the mayor on speed dial. "You're having quite the party, Mr. Harmon," Frank said, his tone changing subtly. "Please, call me Tyler." The young man gave a conspiratorial smile. "And yes, it got a bit out of hand. We'll keep it down." Frank noticed the white powder residue around Tyler's nostril. So did Rodriguez, whose posture stiffened. "I think we might need to come inside," Rodriguez said. Tyler's smile faltered. "That won't be necessary. I said we'll keep it down." "It's not just the noise we're concerned about," Rodriguez persisted, nodding toward Tyler's nose. Tyler wiped his nose self-consciously, then sighed. "Look, officers, I'm sure we can handle this like gentlemen." He reached for his wallet. "Perhaps a donation to the Police Benevolent Fund." Rodriguez stiffened. "Are you attempting to bribe us, Mr. Harmon?" Frank placed a hand on Rodriguez's arm. "Give us a minute, will you, kid? Go check the perimeter." Rodriguez hesitated, clearly conflicted, but eventually moved away, walking around the side of the house. Once he was gone, Frank turned back to Tyler. "That was stupid, son. My partner's new, plays everything by the book." Tyler looked nervous now. "I didn't mean—" "500 makes the noise complaint go away," Frank said quietly, surprising himself with the words. 1,000, if there's cocaine in there, which we both know there is." Tyler stared at him for a long moment, then slowly smiled. "I think we understand each other, officer." "Dobson. Frank Dobson." Tyler went inside briefly, then returned with an envelope. "Will this take care of things?" Frank pocketed the envelope without counting it. "We were never here, but keep it down and get your friends to use the back rooms for their activities." As he walked back to the cruiser, Frank felt a strange mixture of disgust and elation. He'd just crossed a line he'd sworn never to cross when he took his oath 23 years ago. Yet the weight of the envelope in his pocket felt like a solution to problems that had been crushing him for years. Rodriguez was waiting by the car, his expression troubled. "What happened?" "Kid agreed to shut it down," Frank said casually. "No need to make a big deal out of it. I saw cocaine, Frank. We should be making arrests." "You saw nothing," Frank snapped. "You think busting Richard Harmon's son would do anything but get us both fired? Welcome to the real world, rookie. Some people are untouchable." Rodriguez fell silent, but Frank could feel the disapproval radiating from him. It didn't matter. Tonight, for the first time in years, Frank had found a way to take control of his life again. Later, in the bathroom of a 24-hour diner, Frank counted the money. $2,000. More than enough for his daughter's tuition payment. As he stared at his reflection in the grimy mirror, he told himself it was just this once. Just to get through this crisis. Just to help his daughter. He'd never do it again. It was the first of many lies he would tell himself in the months to come. The second time was easier. A doctor caught speeding at 30 over the limit, with alcohol on his breath. Frank sent Rodriguez to get the breathalyzer from the trunk, then made a quiet suggestion to the doctor. "This could cost you your license, your practice." The doctor understood immediately. $1,500. Frank called Rodriguez back, claiming the breathalyzer was malfunctioning. They issued a simple speeding ticket and let the doctor go. The third time was a domestic disturbance call at a judge's house. The fourth, a shoplifting incident involving the mayor's niece. Each time, the justifications came more easily. These weren't real criminals. They were good people who made mistakes. The system would treat them leniently anyway. He was just speeding up the process, taking a fee for his discretion. Each time, Rodriguez grew more distant, his disapproval more palpable. But he never reported Frank, never confronted him directly. Frank took this as tacit acceptance. The money solved problems. Frank caught up on his mortgage, paid down his credit cards, sent his daughter enough for tuition and expenses, explaining it away as a bonus at work. For the first time in years, he could breathe without the constant pressure of financial ruin. He developed a system. He volunteered for calls in affluent neighborhoods. He kept his body camera turned off during crucial conversations. He made sure Rodriguez was distracted or absent during transactions. Word spread among Jefferson City's privileged class. Officer Dobson could make problems disappear for a price. His clients became regulars. Tyler Harmon, with his cocaine habit and penchant for drunk driving, Judge Peterson's wife with her kleptomania. Dr. Michelson, who could never seem to stay under the speed limit after his evening medicinal whiskey. Frank told himself he was still a good cop. He still arrested real criminals, drug dealers who couldn't afford his fees, car thieves, violent offenders. His arrest numbers improved enough to get Mercer off his back. On paper, he was experiencing a late career renaissance. But at night, alone in his house, the money felt dirty. He would sit in his living room, counting it, recounting it, then hiding it in various places around the house. He stopped banking most of it, paranoid about leaving a paper trail. Rodriguez requested a transfer after 3 months. Frank wasn't surprised, but when the request was denied due to staffing shortages, an uneasy truce settled between them. Rodriguez would look the other way during Frank's private consultations, and Frank would make sure Rodriguez got credit for their legitimate arrests. 6 months into his new venture, Frank had amassed nearly $40,000 carefully hidden throughout his house. His daughter had stopped sending desperate texts. His mortgage was current. He'd even lost a few pounds, the constant stress of financial ruin having been lifted from his shoulders. That's when he got the call from Richard Harmon himself. Officer Dobson. The voice was smooth, cultured, with the easy confidence of immense wealth. I believe you've been helpful to my son on several occasions. Frank felt a chill. He dealt only with Tyler, never directly with his father. Mr. Harmon, what can I do for you? My son has a situation, more serious than his usual indiscretions. I'd like to discuss it in person. They arranged to meet at Jefferson Park, in a secluded corner near the old bandstand. Frank arrived early, watching for any sign of a setup. Richard Harmon arrived precisely on time, emerging from a black Lincoln with tinted windows. In person, Harmon was tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed. He carried himself with the easy authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. My son was involved in an accident last night, Harmon said without preamble. Hit and run. The other driver was injured. Frank felt his stomach drop. How badly? Hospital, but stable. The problem is, Tyler was intoxicated, and he had substances in the car. If this goes through official channels, he's looking at serious time. This is beyond what I can fix, Frank said carefully. Hit and run with injuries. DUI. Possession. I understand completely, Harmon interrupted, opening his briefcase. That's why the compensation would be commensurate with the risk. He removed an envelope and handed it to Frank. It was thick, heavy. 20,000, Harmon said, with another 20 when the matter is resolved. Frank stared at the envelope. This wasn't making a traffic ticket disappear. This wasn't overlooking a drunk's bad behavior. This was serious. Felony, serious. What exactly would you need me to do? He asked, already hating himself for not walking away immediately. The accident report has been filed, but no suspects identified yet. The case would be assigned to a detective soon. I need evidence to disappear. The paint samples from the victim's car, specifically, and any surveillance footage from nearby businesses. Frank's mouth went dry. I don't have that kind of access. I'm just a patrol officer. Harmon smiled thinly. I've made inquiries. You have a reputation for resourcefulness, Officer Dobson. Frank should have said no, should have walked away. But $40,000, that was enough to clear his remaining debts entirely. Enough for a fresh start. I'll see what I can do, he heard himself say, pocketing the envelope. As Harmon walked back to his waiting car, Frank felt a strange sense of foreboding. He'd been playing a dangerous game, but this was different. This was crossing a line from which there would be no return. He didn't notice the unmarked police car parked 100 yards away, or the telephoto lens capturing his interaction with Harmon. 3 days later, Frank had managed to access the evidence room and locate the paint samples from the hit and run. He was on his way to meet Harmon with them when he received another call. Change of plans, Harmon said. Meet me at Jefferson Park again. Tonight, 7 p.m. Same spot. I have what you asked for, Frank said. Good. I'll have the rest of your payment. That evening, as Frank approached the meeting point, something felt wrong. The park was too quiet, too empty for a pleasant spring evening. He slowed his pace, scanning his surroundings with the instincts of a veteran cop. He saw Harmon standing under an oak tree, looking uncharacteristically nervous. As Frank approached, he could see sweat beading on the man's forehead despite the cool evening air. Do you have it? Harmon asked without greeting. Frank patted his jacket pocket. Paint samples, enough to create reasonable doubt if they ever connect the car to your son. Harmon nodded, reaching into his suit jacket. Here's the rest of your payment. Frank took the envelope, quickly counting to confirm the amount. 20,000, as agreed. Perhaps we should discuss a more permanent arrangement, Harmon suggested, his voice strangely loud. Your services have been invaluable. 1,000 now for further considerations regarding my son's case. Frank frowned at the odd phrasing and Harmon's unusually projected voice. Then realization dawned. You're wearing a wire, he hissed, grabbing Harmon's lapel and yanking his jacket open. There it was, a small microphone taped to his shirt. Before Frank could react further, blinding lights burst through the darkness from 3 directions. Police, don't move. Hands where we can see them. And Frank ran. The stupidest decision of his life, but panic overrode reason. 23 years on the force, and his only instinct was to flee like a common criminal. His heavy frame wasn't built for sprinting. He made it perhaps 50 yards before the inevitable happened. A root, a divot in the ground. His own clumsiness something sent him crashing down. The impact knocked the wind from his lungs, and before he could recover, a knee pressed into his back. You stupid bastard, Detective Rivera's voice in his ear as the handcuffs clicked shut. You couldn't even take a bribe with dignity. As they hauled him to his feet, Frank caught sight of Rodriguez standing nearby, watching with sad eyes. The betrayal hit harder than the fall. You? Frank wheezed. You set me up? Rodriguez didn't answer, just turned away, unable to meet his former partner's gaze. They led Frank to a waiting police car, his fellow officers, men and women he'd worked with for years, watching in silent judgment. As they placed him in the back seat, Frank caught one last glimpse of Harmon, standing with several plainclothes officers, no longer in handcuffs. The reality crashed down on him like a physical weight. Harmon had been working with internal affairs. The whole thing, from the hit and run to tonight's meeting, had been an elaborate sting operation. And Frank had walked right into it. The holding cell was cold and impersonal. Frank sat on the metal bench, still in his uniform, though his badge and gun had been taken. In the harsh fluorescent light, the dark blue fabric looked almost black, like a bruise spreading across his body. The door opened, and Captain Mercer entered, accompanied by Internal Affairs Lieutenant Whitmore. Neither man spoke immediately, just stood observing Frank as if he were a specimen in a lab. Finally, Whitmore broke the silence. 57. Frank looked up. What? We've documented 57 separate instances of you accepting bribes over the past 8 months. That's just what we know about. The number hit Frank like a physical blow. Had it really been that many? He'd lost count himself after a while, the transactions blurring together in his memory. I want a lawyer, he said hoarsely. You'll get one, Mercer replied. But Frank, you need to understand what you're facing. This isn't just a few counts of accepting bribes. This is a RICO case. Conspiracy. We've got you on video, on audio. We've got your bank records. We've traced the cash deposits. We've got witnesses willing to testify, including your partner, Whitmore added. Frank felt sick. Rodriguez? He came to us 4 months ago, Mercer said. Been wearing a wire ever since. Every conversation, every transaction. He gave you every chance to stop, to come clean. The betrayal stung worse than the arrest itself. Frank had noticed Rodriguez becoming increasingly distant, but had attributed it to disapproval, to youthful idealism, not to an active investigation targeting him. Why are you telling me this? Frank asked. Because we want bigger fish, Whitmore said simply. You've been taking money from some very powerful people to make serious crimes disappear. We want them." Richard Harmon agreed to cooperate to protect his son, Mercer added. "But there are others. Judge Peterson, Dr. Michelson, the Collins family. We want them all." "You're looking at 15 to 20 years, Frank," Whitmore said. "Cooperate, and it could be considerably less." Frank tried to comprehend the scale of what was happening. 20 years in prison. He'd be 70 when he got out, if he survived. No pension, no future. Just an old, disgraced ex-cop with nothing. "I need to think," he mumbled. They left him alone with his thoughts. Hours passed. Frank's mind wandered to the past, to his academy days, when the badge had meant something to him, to his marriage before the job poisoned it, to his daughter's birth, when he'd held her tiny hand and promised to make the world better for her. Somewhere along the way, he'd lost himself, not suddenly, but gradually, compromise by compromise, justification by justification. His lawyer arrived eventually, court-appointed defender who looked too young to be out of law school. The news wasn't good. The evidence was overwhelming. The lawyer advised cooperation for leniency. Frank agreed to talk. He gave them names, dates, amounts. He described his system, his contacts. With each revelation, he felt a strange combination of shame and relief. When it was done, when he'd betrayed everyone who had trusted him with their secrets, Whitmore informed him of his deal. 8 years, eligible for parole in 5. In exchange for testimony against 14 of Jefferson City's most prominent citizens. "We'll move you to the county jail tomorrow," Whitmore said. "Federal marshals will take custody after the arraignment. Protective housing, separate from general population." Frank nodded numbly. Special treatment, even in disgrace. That night, alone in his cell, Frank wrote 3 letters. One to his ex-wife, asking for forgiveness he knew he didn't deserve. One to his daughter, trying to explain how a man who once believed in justice could abandon it so completely. And one to Rodriguez, acknowledging that the younger officer had done the right thing, had been the cop that Frank had once been. He didn't mail them. There would be time for that later. Instead, he lay on the thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, wondering when exactly the weight of his badge had become too heavy to bear with honor. The next morning, the transport officers found Frank Dobson hanging from a makeshift noose crafted from his uniform shirt, twisted and tied to the cell bars. His face was bloated and purple, his eyes bulging, his tongue protruding grotesquely. The man who had spent decades enforcing the law had delivered his own final judgment. The news barely made the papers. A small article on page 6. "Disgraced officer dies in custody. No mention of his 23 years of service before his fall. No mention of the daughter who would receive his letters too late. No mention of the 14 prominent citizens who would now escape prosecution without their star witness." At his sparsely attended funeral, Rodriguez stood at the back, watching the simple casket lower into the ground. He fingered the badge in his pocket, this new detective shield, earned through his role in exposing corruption. "Was it worth it?" Rivera asked quietly, standing beside him. Rodriguez didn't answer immediately. He thought about the fine line between justice and vengeance, about the weight that comes with wearing a badge. "No," he finally said, "but it was necessary." As they walked away from the grave of Officer Frank Dobson, rain began to fall on Jefferson City, washing the streets clean, at least for a while. The investigation into Jefferson City's elite quietly faded away in the following months. Richard Harmon's son received a suspended sentence for a reduced charge. Judge Peterson continued to preside over his courtroom. Dr. Michelson kept his medical license. And Officer Miguel Rodriguez learned what Frank Dobson had learned years before, that some forms of justice are reserved only for those who cannot afford to purchase immunity. 6 months later, Rodriguez turned in his badge. The weight had become too heavy for him to bear with honor.